All right, good morning, boys and girls. Welcome to Sunday school. Really quick, before we get into our story and our worship for this morning, I just wanted to take a chance to welcome you, recap what we learned last week, and talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing this week. So I'm going to show you last week's lesson picture. And as you probably remember, last week we started the story of Joseph. So Joseph, remember, was one of 12 brothers. He was his father's favorite, which caused some problems for him. And we saw that Joseph was thrown into a pit by his brothers because they were so jealous, and then sold into slavery. He went to Egypt where he worked. He was accused of something he didn't do and thrown into jail. He interpreted some dreams for some of Pharaoh's servants, and he asked Pharaoh's cupbearer when he got out of jail that he would remember him. The cupbearer forgot. So that's kind of where we left off last week. We talked about how Joseph had a lot of bad things happening in his life, right? There was a lot of hard things happening to him, but that God was always with Joseph. Even in the midst of his hardship, he was with Joseph in it. Now this week, as always, I'm going to start off by showing you a picture. This picture is a grain relief. So it's of barley, which was a type of grain that was grown in Egypt during Joseph's time. And I'm also going to show you a dreams poster, because Joseph in this story, we saw a little bit last week, but then we're going to talk even more this week. Joseph was able to interpret dreams. So back then, often God would speak to people through dreams. He might give some clues about what was going to happen in the future through dreams, and Joseph was able to interpret those with God's help. So you can see there are 4 dreams here that Joseph was able to interpret. We talked last week about how Joseph dreamed that he and his brothers had harvested grain. Joseph's brothers bowed down to Joseph's. We saw the sun and the moon and the stars bowing down before Joseph. And we saw that this meant that Joseph's brothers would one day bow before him, and that Joseph would be the leader of the family, which is part of the reason why Joseph's brothers were really mad, right? Joseph was also able to interpret the cupbearer's dream. Remember last week he saw a vine that was grown into grapes, squeezed the grapes into Pharaoh's cup and gave it to Pharaoh. And the dream meant that the cupbearer would get out of jail and get to go back to work with Pharaoh. Now in this week's story, we're going to talk about a dream that Pharaoh had that Joseph was able to interpret. So Pharaoh is going to have a dream that 7 healthy cows were eaten by 7 sickly cows. And then Pharaoh dreamed that 7 full heads of grain were swallowed up by 7 thin heads of grain. And Pharaoh's dream is going to talk about feast and famine in the land of Egypt. And we're going to see how Joseph can help him interpret those dreams. We'll also see that Joseph's brothers have to travel to Egypt and what Joseph's reaction to them will be. So after we go to our time of worship, we're going to come back together. We're going to get into more details about Joseph's story. So enjoy.
Because of the Lord's faithful love, we do not fail. And I love that old cross where the dearest and best for a world of lost sinners was slain. So I'll cherish the old rugged cross till my trophies at last I lay down. And I will cling to the old rugged cross and exchange it someday for a crown. On a hill far away stood an old rugged cross, the emblem of suffering and shame. And I love that old cross where the dearest and best for a world of lost sinners was slain. So I'll cherish the old rugged cross till my trophies at last I lay down. And I will cling to the old rugged cross and exchange it someday for a crown. And I will cling to the old rugged cross and exchange it someday for a crown.
All right, hi again. Hope you enjoyed that time of worship. Today we are going to be in the book of Genesis again as we continue Joseph's story. We are going to be reading from chapter 42, starting in verse 1. So I'm going to hand it over to our scripture reader for this morning to read you our story.
Genesis 42, verses 1 through 7. Joseph's brothers go to Egypt. When Jacob learned that there was grain for sale in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you look at one another?" And he said, "Behold, I have heard that there is grain for sale in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us there, that we may live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with his brothers, for he feared that harm might happen to him. Thus the sons of Israel came to buy among the others who came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Now Joseph was governor over the land. He was the one who sold to all the people of the land, and Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he treated them like strangers and spoke roughly to them. "Where do you come from?" he said. They said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food."
All right, welcome back. As always, I'm going to recap the story for you in my own words while I show you the lesson picture, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. One night, the Pharaoh of Egypt had a dream. In his dream, 7 skinny cows ate 7 fat cows. Then he had another dream that 7 skinny heads of grain ate 7 fat heads of grain. Pharaoh heard that Joseph could tell him what the dreams meant. God helped Joseph explain the dreams. The dreams were a warning that a famine was coming. Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of preparing for the famine. Joseph was now the second in command in Egypt. For 7 years, Joseph helped the people save and store food for the famine. Meanwhile, Joseph's brothers and father, Jacob, were back in Canaan. In Canaan, the famine came, but the people weren't ready. They had a hard time finding food. Jacob heard that Egypt had food, so he sent his sons to Egypt. Joseph's brothers traveled to Egypt and bowed before Joseph to ask him for food. Joseph recognized his brothers, but his brothers did not recognize him. Joseph decided to test his brothers to see if they had changed. Eventually, Joseph saw that his brothers had changed. He began to cry and told his brothers, "I am Joseph. God sent me here to help you. There will be 5 more years of famine. God sent me here to keep you alive." Joseph told his brothers to return home and bring their father and their families. Joseph promised to take care of everyone during the famine. Later, when Jacob died, Joseph's brothers became afraid. They were worried that Joseph would get back at them for how they had hurt him long ago. But Joseph told his brothers, "Do not be afraid. You planned something evil for me, but God used it to create something good." So, in today's passage, in today's story, we saw how Joseph was able to take the gift and the knowledge that God gave him to interpret dreams and was able to use that to help the land of Egypt to prepare for a famine. A famine is basically when there's just not enough food. So back then, people really relied, and even now, people really relied on farming to get the food that they need. And if there's a famine, that means that they were not able to grow enough food for the people. So Joseph was able to predict by interpreting Pharaoh's dream that there would be 7 years of famine, 7 years where there was not enough food for the people of Egypt to eat. So because Pharaoh had had this dream that there were going to be 7 good years, 7 years of plenty where there's so much food, and then 7 years of famine, Egypt was able to prepare to store grain, to store food, and to save it for the years of famine so that their people would have enough to eat and they would be able to survive the years where food was not growing. Now, Canaan, where Joseph's family was living, didn't know about the famine ahead of time. They were not able to prepare, so they were running out of food. Jacob, remember Joseph's father, had heard that there was still food in Egypt, so he sent his sons, Joseph's brothers, to try and bring back food to save the family. Now, Joseph saw right away when his brothers came to him that it was his brothers. They didn't recognize him. Remember, a lot of time has passed. He's probably dressed really differently because he's now one of Pharaoh's, right-hand mans. He's working for Pharaoh. He's dressed differently. He's older. He looks different. They don't recognize him. But he immediately recognizes his brothers. And he puts them kind of to the test to make sure that they've changed. And eventually they show him that they have changed. And Joseph begins to weep. He's so happy to see them. He forgives them, and he tells them, "You did something for evil. You did something to hurt me many years ago. But God had a plan all along to work it for good for his people, for our family." If Joseph had not gone to Egypt, his family may not have survived the famine, because it was because of Joseph that they were able to come to Egypt and have the food that they needed to survive the famine. So even though when Joseph was thrown into that pit, when he was sold into slavery, when he was working and then accused falsely of doing something wrong, when he spent 2 years in jail, those were all bad things that happened to him, all because of his brother's selfishness and anger towards Joseph, right? But God took all those bad things that had happened to Joseph and worked them not only for the good of Joseph, but of his whole family. And as we know, Joseph's family is the family that God is using to redeem the world. So we're going to keep following this family through the Old Testament and eventually to Jesus, and see how Joseph's family, which is Jacob's family, which is Abraham's family, is the family that God has chosen and God will use to redeem the world, to bring a rescuer to the world. So even though things seemed bad, God was using the bad things in Joseph's life and was working them towards the good of Joseph and to people around him. So things in our lives sometimes are really hard, right? And sometimes they're hard because of choices we make. Sometimes we sin and things become hard. But sometimes they're just hard. Even if we do the right things, even if we're following God, even if we're trying our best to live in a way that's honoring to him and glorifying to him, this life, this world is not perfect. Sometimes things are hard. But we can trust that God is always working for our good. And that doesn't mean that things will get easier, not right away, maybe not even ever. But we know that God is working for our eternal good, for the good of our entire lives, not just our lives here on earth. We can have hope again in Joseph's story. We have the benefit of being able to look back at the Bible and see stories of people that have already lived and followed God, to see that he works out the things for good for those who are loving him and trusting him. And we can trust that that is true in our lives as well. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Joel for our Explore session, and then Miss Becky will tell you your activity for this week.
Tigers, panthers, lions, cheetahs. All these big cats are very strong, fast predators. But even they need to be rescued and cared for sometimes. And that's why we're here. We are at the Caddyshack Ranch Wildlife Sanctuary. This place is so cool. They have over 40 big cats. They've got lions, they got leopards, and they have lots of tigers. We're here because today we're talking about how God took care of Joseph when Joseph was going through tough times. So turn in your Bibles to Genesis 41 and get ready to discover that God can use our tough times to bring about good in our lives and the lives of others. I'm Joel. This is Explore the Bible on Location, and you guys are gonna love this place. And I ain't lying. I ain't lying. Not even a smile. Hi, Abu. Hey guys, that's Abu. He's huge. Now, when you see a king of the jungle like that, you're probably not thinking in your mind, oh, that poor king of the jungle is gonna need to be rescued one day. But believe it or not, sometimes big cats can't survive in the wild without help, and they need to be rescued. You guys remember last time when we were talking about the mean things that Joseph's brothers did to him? Well, today, we're talking about God's plan not only to rescue Joseph, but to use Joseph to rescue his brothers. Bye, Abu. He's gonna go play over there now. God used the bad times in Joseph's life to rescue his family. Joseph became a servant in Potiphar's home. God was with Joseph and blessed him. Someone lied about Joseph, and Joseph was put in prison. But God was with Joseph and blessed him. Later, Joseph met Pharaoh and helped Pharaoh interpret a dream. Pharaoh made Joseph a governor over all of Egypt. Even though Joseph wasn't home, God still blessed him, using him to do something very special. And speaking of taking care of things in a place that's not normally their home, we're here with Kurt. Kurt, thanks for letting us visit today.
Joel, thank you so much for coming out and enjoying the animals. As you see, I tell everybody this is a little part of paradise, and it is for the animals.
This is amazing. Kurt, tell us a little bit about the history of Caddyshack and why you guys exist.
You know, Caddyshack started a long time ago, I have to say, as we started with the Florida Panther Project, talking about the plight of the Florida Panthers, going to schools and museums. Unfortunately, huge problems. We have animals here that actually were never out in the wild, but are all wild animals. They came from places that unfortunately weren't able to keep up to the codes of what should be being done for the animals. And we try to exceed that here, benefiting, of course, the animals that we care for.
Right. And you guys are called a wildlife sanctuary.
We are.
Can you explain a little bit about what that means?
You know, when we make a commitment to the animals that we pick are animals that desperately need a home, and we call this a forever home for them because this is the last time that they're going to get shuffled around. They're not going to get moved to other areas. They're not going to get passed to somewhere else. They'll be part of our responsibility and care for the rest of their life.
That's amazing. So let's talk a little bit about the different animals that you have here. Because you don't just have cats.
No, we don't, you know, and it's a variety, but we have tigers and lions, and we have leopards, lynx, panthers, and servals, which are from Africa, from the Serengeti Plains, and we have other animals.
That's a lot of animals.
It is a lot of animals, but again, as I keep saying that it might be my dream, but everybody working together is what makes it a reality and a benefit for the animals.
Wow. So I know that animals don't usually have super long lives in the wild, but they tend to have much longer lives here. Why is that?
They say that the wild is very stressful, and I don't want to experience that, but I understand that, of course, nutrition is hard to come by. So to keep a stable environment with nutrition, activities, and of course a good medical team, all helps because, of course, in the wild, what could happen is a small incident could become a major disaster. And so what we look for here, of course, is daily care. It's important not only for the nutrition, but for the regular health, just like us, going to the dentist to make sure our teeth are in good shape, getting physicals on a regular basis. And of course, you know, what tops all that off is, of course, is eating the proper foods.
Wow. Kurt and his team are doing everything they can to care for these awesome animals. And that really reminds me of what our story is all about today. Kurt, thanks for letting us visit. Do you mind if we still take a look around?
Go right ahead. Thank you guys so much for coming out and enjoying the animals.
It's awesome. The Pharaoh in Egypt had a strange dream. Joseph helped the Pharaoh understand that the dream meant a famine was coming to their land. God used Joseph to lead Egypt to store up enough food to prepare for the famine. This famine also affected Canaan, the land where Joseph's family lived. Joseph's brothers, you know, the ones who were really mean to him, traveled to Egypt in search of food. After testing the brothers, Joseph revealed his identity to them. Joseph showed them that he was alive and that he forgave them of the wrong they did to him. Joseph had his brothers bring Jacob and the whole family from their home in Canaan down to Egypt so Joseph could take care of them. God worked through Joseph, and the bad situation that took him to Egypt was used to save Joseph's family. Even when we can't see it, God is using our tough times to create something good. That's Tamara. Her favorite color is green. I think it is. Anyway, these big cats were brought here so they could be rescued and provided for. God used the bad things that Joseph's brothers did to him to bring about an amazing plan for Joseph's entire family. God can use the tough things we go through to bring about good in our lives too. And that's what we discover when we dig into the book of Genesis. I'm Joel. That's Tamara. This is Explore the Bible on Location, and I wonder if they let people ride on the backs of tigers. You know, like a horsey? It sounds fun. I'm gonna go find out. Excuse me, sir. Do you guys have saddles for tigers?
Hi friends, I hope you're having such a great week this week. I am, because I'm in a new place. So I'm currently sitting in my hammock, but I'm going to show you a quick video that I took the other day of the beautiful mountains in the state of Colorado. That's where I am. So, do you see all that white on top of those mountains? It snowed the other day. There wasn't a lot, but I can't believe I saw snow in September. Well, anyways, I'm excited to share the activity with you today. So, we talked about how Joseph was in charge of Egypt and in charge of the food because there was a famine. So what I want you to do is I want you to bake bread, maybe eat some cereal, bake some cookies maybe, because in the story, Joseph took care of all the grain, and inside of bread and cookies and cereal, there's grain. So it'd be really cool if you did that with your parents. Don't do it by yourself, you can do it with your parents. I hope you have so much fun with this activity. I'll see you next week.